Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. We've got a very special 2025 NFL Draft Order Rookie Review episode for you guys today. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Jon Ledyard. Jon, I'm excited, man. You and I started texting last night, not just about the draft order, but about the top prospects. So I know you're diving into this class a little bit with some of the guys at the top. I know you're a trench guy, so edge rushers, interior defensive linemen, they're going to be high on the list. But I know you got some quarterback thoughts in there too here for this episode. How you doing, my friend, starting your 2025 NFL Draft film journey?
It's been amazing, Trevor. The prospect evaluations have been mixed, but the experience of diving into the draft again this early has been really fun. Last couple of years, I have not been able to do that, and so it's been fun prioritizing it again and taking a look at some of these players. And I started looking at some Senior Bowl players, but we'll get to that later on down the road probably. But man, the top of this class, as we're going to look at, we always start these with quarterback, right? Because that's where the league starts. What's the quarterback landscape? Who needs them, and how many are available? And obviously free agency trades could be part of that story, but the draft is going to be a big part of that story. And so that's where we kind of launch into things today. And it's bleak in the draft class, but thankfully not that many teams need them. And that actually could impact things quite heavily, I think, in this draft.
Yeah, so we're going to break down all of that. We're going to talk about the updated draft order that we have after Week 15 in the NFL. So we'll have 3 games to go in the regular season. And I got to tell you, losses are paramount this season. Sometimes sometimes you're like number 3 overall, and if you lose games, like, bummer, we dropped to number 5. This year, we could just start here, honestly, as we open up the draft order. Right now, the Las Vegas Raiders are picking number 1 overall because they lost to the Atlanta Falcons on Monday Night Football. And as we know, the Jacksonville Jaguars a couple of weeks ago beat the Tennessee Titans. They were the team that was picking at number 1, but because they got that extra win, they got bumped down. Jon, the difference for the Raiders with winning that game, because strength of schedule, as you guys see on the right-hand side, that is the main tiebreaker. I know a lot of people think, okay, no, this team beat this team head-to-head. That means they're in front of them. It's not head-to-head when it comes to the draft order. Head-to-head is a tiebreaker when it comes to playoff spots and seeding and divisions, but it is not a primary tiebreaker when it comes to the NFL draft order. Strength of schedule on the right-hand side, that is the primary tiebreaker, because if you have the same losing record, but your schedule was easier than somebody else's, well, then you're going to get the advantage. So the idea is, if you want a higher draft pick, you want your team to have a lower strength of schedule because you want them to lose to worse teams. That's why you get rewarded for this. So the Raiders, picking number 1 overall right now because they're tied in that ranking, if they would have won against the Falcons, they would have dropped all the way to number 7. 7! A 6-spot swing is nuts. Especially, obviously, like you said, in this class where, we'll dig into some of the quarterback conversation and, which guys we think could be top 10 guys, how many other guys we even think are first-round guys as we sort of talk about teams and quarterback needs. But if you're dropping from 1 to 6, that is an eternity. That is a Grand Canyon of a gap of what you could be getting with prospects. So how do you feel about sort of where we're at here? And it just feels like so many teams are right there with either 2 to 4 wins in that top 10, and it's so tight.
Yeah, we really do have a tanking situation. Like, there's no doubt Gardner Minshew's the best quarterback on the Raiders, and he might be, I can't even remember if he's hurt now.
No, he's hurt. He's out. So he's hurt.
Right. I'm saying, like, the Raiders, even before, like, early in the year when he was better than this, they're, like, going for a scenario, basically, in which they're like, yeah, we're not going to be at the Giants. Daniel Jones is, we don't think he's good, but, like, they could win some of these games. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And they're just like, nope, we're going for it. And obviously, the Jaguars brought Trevor Lawrence back, played him, and he ends up being hurt, and they end up being done with him, shutting him down for the season. But, if they were in it, would that have been the case? So there's all these scenarios playing out, basically. But these teams are sort of like, yeah, we're going for the top of the draft. Like, we're playing guys who have no business playing in the NFL, and that's really where this gets interesting, because there's like some pretty non-competitive situations right now in the league, and the Raiders and Giants are chief amongst those, I think. So no surprise that they're 1-2. Now the Raiders, you think about their best players, right? Devontae Adams gone, Max Crosby injured, Christian Wilkins injured, so they have like nothing. All right, like this team is even was even in that game last night speaks to a lot of says a lot about the Atlanta Falcons and where they're currently at. And I don't know if we'll get to that discussion today, but the way they're going, pretty soon they'll be in this draft order conversation, the way they're heading right now. And so, yeah, it's going to be, I mean, I think the top of the draft, just because you want control, that's everything with being up top, especially in a class that, doesn't have probably the top 10 that we're used to. If you've got the 1 or 2 pick and teams like, you know what, we don't really think the draft is that great, we want to get up there and get the one or two guy, great, you're in position to be able to be bargained with for those spots. And if you're like, hey, the rest of this draft is bad, we need this guy at the very top, you can get one of those premier, potentially franchise changing players. And so we'll see if they hit on those evaluations, obviously, but just being in that position is pretty big in any draft, but it seems like it's going to be really big in this draft to be at 1 or 2.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because maybe less of the fact that, like you said, like the quarterbacks there, it's not like a Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May situation, but it's the scarcity. It's also the scarcity that drives up the price to potentially be a team to move down from that number 1 overall pick, like we have seen happen over the last couple of years. So let's look at the draft order, and I'll break it down here. We'll go a little bit further than this, but I do want to bounce around a little. I said that the Las Vegas Raiders, they're picking number 1. The New York Giants right behind them at number 2 as it sits currently. Both of those teams are the only teams in the NFL with just 2 wins, and we'll get into some schedule stuff as we talk about these teams and some of their team needs. New England's next. So New England's next on the list to start the 3-11 teams because they have the lowest strength of schedule. It goes New England at 3, Jacksonville at 4, Carolina at 5, Tennessee at 6, and then Cleveland at 7. Those are all the 3-11 teams. And before we go any further, I do want to talk about the New England Patriots. The Patriots beating the Chicago Bears in mid-November was obviously like a cool thing for the team. Fans that want their team to win football games, obviously a big deal. But them winning that game gives them that extra win and takes them out of the number 1 overall spot, because if they would have lost that game, then they would have been sitting here at 2-12, just like the Raiders, just like the Giants, and they would have put themselves in a situation where one of those 2 teams, the Giants and the Raiders, which the ones that we feel have the strongest quarterback needs, would have been willing to jump over the other to make sure they get the quarterback that they want. As you talked about there, like scarcity with the quarterback position to drive up that price. And so, would it have been 3 first-round picks like we've seen before? No, it wouldn't have been that type of a trade. But for New England, clearly a rebuilding team, that win against Chicago kind of sets them back a little bit when it comes to what could have been for this team, especially because, John, you look at their schedule moving forward, the Patriots, Buffalo, Chargers, Buffalo. Yeah. Like, that is rough. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that, because Buffalo is obviously one of the best teams in the NFL, and then the Chargers are a team that basically has to put their foot on the gas when it comes to making the playoffs. So that's where it's sort of tough for me, and I look at Patriots fans, it's like, man, would have loved to have that number 1 overall pick. Sure, Travis Hunter might have been enticing to maybe pick him at number 1 overall, but the thing is, you could have probably traded down to number 3 with whoever wasn't at number 2 and still gotten Travis Hunter and some extra draft capital to help you rebuild. But I keep going back to that name, and we can talk about Jacksonville in a second, but for New England, as a team that does not need a quarterback, the one that really hurts the most by picking up that extra win to not be at that 1 spot.
Yeah, I mean, looks like they're going to finish 3-14, so we'll see how everybody else finishes, obviously, to finish out the rest of the season. But the Raiders don't even have a hard schedule, but I can't see them winning a game, Trevor. I just can't. Like, they're just so bad. But, like, maybe it is possible. You do play Jacksonville. They're pretty miserable. I mean, Mac Jones has looked rough, but they've been a little bit more competitive. They have more talent, certainly, than the Raiders do. But, I mean, it's pretty listless across the board with these guys. I mean, the Giants, Atlanta next week. I mean, Atlanta,
they could beat Atlanta, dude. If Kirk Cousins is still the quarterback, which I think he's going to be for 1 more week.
Yeah.
I don't
know if he is.
As we're recording this podcast, maybe he's not. Maybe he's going to pull a. Didn't Shane Steichen do this? Wasn't he like, yeah, we're sticking with Joe, and then it was just like, nah, just kidding. Anthony's going to start. It's like, okay, maybe we have a situation like that, because Kirk looked cooked on Monday Night Football, and he's looked cooked for really the last month.
I think they're going to make a change now. I don't know what that. So that game, yeah, it is a possibility. You're right. Maybe the Giants could win that game. That D-line, if a rookie starts, like, yeah, we'll see. But anyway, I mean, I think the Patriots still have a chance to get there. And you're right. Them being the number one pick is probably, from a neutral perspective, just like observing the draft perspective, that might be the most interesting scenario because it would either they're going to take, probably Travis Hunter or one of the whoever they deem as the best player in the draft, and probably who is how these things typically go, probably who is the consensus best player in the draft, whoever we settle on sort of at that point. Right now, it seems like that's going to be Hunter. We'll see. But I think they would either go that direction, or more likely what they should do probably is hold that pick for ransom and be able to really add to this rebuild. I mean, they are one of the least talented teams in all of football, and that's why I think the Raiders are in that conversation too. The Giants have a little more talent. They need to figure out the quarterback position. But the Raiders and Patriots, to me, are like so devoid of talent, like more devoid than any other franchise in the league. And so for them to have that pick and be able to use it as a bargaining chip, I think is critical for those two franchises. So if the Patriots could get back there knowing that they will not take a quarterback and that they could hold that pick and move down maybe a spot or two with the quarterback needy teams behind them and pick up a ton of picks and ton of assets and then still get the player they wanted anyway and maybe probably the best player in the draft, a really nice spot to be in if they can get there. So you're right. That win over the Bears, absolutely devastating, and hopefully they can get back, for Patriots fans at least, hopefully they can get back to number one.
I do want to just talk about sort of that quarterback conversation and how we view these guys, and really the quarterback needy team, sort of like what you were talking about at the top of the show to sort of set up the top 10 of the draft. I do want to touch on Jacksonville really quick, and we could dive into this a little more as the show goes on, but I talked about how tough the schedule is for the Patriots, going Bills, Chargers, Bills. Jacksonville's on the other side of things. Jacksonville's got the Raiders, they got the Tennessee Titans, and they got the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, like, all three of those games, I know Jacksonville's not good, but all three of them, you at least have a fighting chance against those three teams. And so Jacksonville's the other team, in my opinion, that would make for a fun number one overall pick. One, because they have the quarterback, they have Trevor Lawrence. Two, I think the roster's got some good pieces there. You'd have an opportunity to trade back with a team that's looking to trade up to go get a quarterback. And then three, if Trent Baalke's still the GM, obviously it's a wild ride. Anything's on the table. Anything's on the table with Trent Baalke. So
we can't do it again. Not another year.
What would that be? Would that be 3 first-round picks for Baalke in 5 years? Is that what that would be?
That's
because he would have had Lawrence in 2020.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it was
Walker.
It would have been Lawrence in 2021, Walker in 2022, the 2023, the 2024, and then the number one pick in 2025. So it would be three number one overall picks in 5 years for a general manager for the same team.
Keeping your job as the number one overall pick for 5 years or for 3 of 5 years is complete insanity. No way that's happened in NFL history, right? Like
no way. Unless it was a situation where, like, way back in the day, we had like an owner GM who like literally will never fire himself. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like a Jerry Jones situation or something like that.
Nobody's gonna take that job if they got a wise anyway. But the Jaguar situation is interesting, right? Raiders, Titans. I mean, that win over the Titans. You talk about devastating wins. That win over the Titans in Week 14 was devastating. Like you gotta find.
Didn't even look good. Didn't even look good. I'm sorry, Jags fans who were watching this show. Like, it was, gosh.
It was bad, man. It was bad. And now they losing to the Jets, finding a way to lose that game was huge. But I mean, they've still looked way more competitive than the Raiders have looked. Like, yes. I would still expect them to win at least one of these games that they have left on the schedule, maybe two. Which, I mean, yeah, that's the NFL, and that's the way it goes. And Doug's not going to be there, so he don't care. It's kind of like I forget who it was a couple years ago. Was it Lovey for the Bears? Like when he was like, "Yeah, we're winning. I don't care." Got some drafts. I forget who it was, but or no, maybe it was the Texans. I can't remember. It was I can't.
Oh, I think it was the Texans. I think I remember what you're talking about. Well, you remember.
It was Lovey who helped the Bears out. That's right, and got the Texans. That's what happened. The Texans got a lower pick or something because he won. And the Bears got the one pick and the number one pick.
Lovey was part of the Buccaneers tank for Jameis in 2014 when in the second half of the last game of the season, remember it was the Titans and the Bucs that were sort of like right there with the teams that could get the number one overall pick in the 2015 NFL draft. And in the second half of the last game of the year, like Mike Evans came out in street clothes. Like Levante David came out in street clothes. Like the
Not
like
even hiding it.
like they were like, yeah, they're hurt, and he's like, no, they're not. No, they're not. They are absolutely
You gotta be
not.
shameless. You can't let pride get in the way.
No, you got to tank. You got to do
Future
it.
of the franchise. It's at stake. Like, this is everything. So the Jags finding a way to lose to, the rest of these games is going to be critical. But, if I'm guessing right now, I think they win at least one. And I mean, there's a lot of 3-win teams right now that might not win again. And so, I think that they really would be better off if they find a way to lose. But I think they're just they're better than some of the teams they're going to be playing. They're probably more talented than the Titans. I would say if you're ranking least talented teams in the NFL, teams that need the most influence of talent. I mean, the Raiders and Patriots, are they first and second for you? Then
I was going to say,
the Titans are in that conversation for third, right?
I was going to say, I think the Patriots are 1 for least talented. I think the Raiders are 2. Would the Titans be 3? I don't know.
I think they're in the conversation. 3 is more of a conversation depending on what you value, probably, but they're definitely in the. I would be shocked if they weren't in the conversation for everybody.
I think Carolina might be 3, honestly.
Yeah, I would say, yep, Carolina's 3. The Titans.
And again, I know people are going to be listening to this show. It's not like we say you don't have any talent. Like, there are building block pieces that I do like for the Carolina Panthers, but just top to bottom, I mean, I think I would have them 3. The Raiders and the Patriots are clearly 1 and 2, and then like you said, there's a bucket. There's a pretty big gap from those other teams, like Jacksonville. Yeah. Well, Jacksonville's got a decent amount of talent. Titans, Panthers.
Titans have names, but they paid all those guys, and none of them have been good. So that's just it was just a devastating offseason for them. They spent the most money in total guarantees, I believe, this offseason.
Yeah,
any team in the league.
Snead's been tough for them when he's been healthy.
Ridley hasn't lived up to expectations. Cushenberry's been okay, but if you're paying
he's
for
been
center,
hurt too. Anyways, let's talk about quarterbacks, because I do think that setting that up is the appropriate conversation as we sort of get to the rest of the draft order and we talk about a lot of these teams. When you look at the quarterback situation, you said it at the top of the show, there's not as many teams that need quarterbacks as I think is typical, and even maybe we thought would be the case. Quarterback situations are kind of like head coaches, right? We think that there's going to be 6 to 8 openings a year when it comes to head coaches in the NFL. Quarterbacks are a little bit similar. Maybe not as many teams would need quarterbacks, but 4 to 6, normally it feels like they are desperate for a new quarterback every single season. I'm kind of just making that up off the top of my head of vibes. I'm not looking at a draft board specifically, but when you look at this NFL draft, yeah, of course that there are teams that could use new quarterbacks, but truly desperate and need a quarterback this coming offseason, particularly this upcoming draft, who do you have as those teams that you're labeling as yes, they need to focus on getting a quarterback here and a young quarterback for the future?
Well, the Raiders and Giants are the only 100%ers, right, I think, in the entire league. Now, the Titans and Browns are in unique situations. The Titans, are they going to be high enough in the order to really seriously consider quarterback? Would they rather go the free agent route? Even though they spent that money last year, they still are in a decent spot with cap space. Could they be a contender for a Sam Darnold and free? Could they go in a direction like that? I mean, that might be more like keep Levis developing, Darnold on a shorter term, Baker-like contract, after this year. Maybe they're a player for somebody like that. We'll see. Or maybe they're a player for a Rodgers, because they just, again, if you're at 6 or 7, if that's where they end up, how realistic is that path for you in this quarterback class? You need so much more talent. Do you really want to go that direction when you could still get a pretty good player at another position there? I think they're a maybe, and the Browns are unique in that, obviously Watts is still going to be there. They can't move him probably. And so, I think do you really want to bring back Jameis? You're about to bench him probably this week. I mean, DTR isn't the guy. Maybe Jameis comes back in a short-term deal, if he's going to be very cheap and that's really all they can afford, or they go the draft route. But at 8 or at 7, and the Browns may very well lose out here, probably will. So maybe they're one of the teams that's most likely to move up in the draft order. They play Bengals, Dolphins, Ravens. They're probably going to lose all 3 of those games. So you might be able to lock them at 3 wins where some of these other guys are playing each other and they might get another win. So they might be a team that moves up some, but are you really going to be able to draft a quarterback in this class? Do you want to draft a quarterback in this class? So they're interesting. And then the only other team I'd say the Jets in the top 10, really in the top 18. If we're looking at current non-playoff teams, if the playoffs start today, I would say that the only other team I would consider for quarterback are the Jets. I mean, some people are throwing the Saints out there. They don't have the cap space to go after one. And, they already have Rattler to develop on their roster. Do they really want to? I mean, a 10, is that likely? I just don't think so. And I don't see anybody after them in the teens going that route either. So, the Jets are the interesting one because the reporting is that they're probably going to move on from Aaron Rodgers, which, I mean, obviously he's not playing at that contract. I do think they'll move on from him. Maybe he looked better this past week. Maybe he gives them some hope with his level of play to finish the season, and they look at the landscape and they're like, what else are we going to do? We're not bringing Sam Darnold back here. So, I think there's maybe a little more of a possibility than the reporting's indicated. But I also just think this is an organization that wants to start over, and that's been clear in the moves they've made already, and I think it's just going to continue to be more and more clear this offseason. So they might be a team that's content, though, going the Raiders route this year, where like they start the season and they don't have a quarterback that matters at all, and they don't care. Like they're like, we're thinking all about the future and trying to get the number 1 pick for the following draft. That could be the direction they go. So really, I mean, I think there's 2 locks and then 3 maybes. The locks are the Raiders and Giants. The maybes are the Titans, Browns, and Jets. But when we get to the draft, I bet there will be at least 2 of those teams that do not need a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the right assessment. The tricky part about all of this is sort of the class itself versus who's also picking at the very top, right? Because you mentioned the 2 100%ers right now are the teams that pick 1 and 2. And so it gets really difficult. You could say to yourself, hey, Tennessee needs a quarterback, Cleveland needs a quarterback, the Jets need a quarterback, maybe New Orleans, but you're getting in these situations where all of those teams right there, especially those 3 teams picking 6, 7, 8, boom, 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 right there, they all could use a nice quarterback. If this was last year's quarterback class, they're probably thinking long and hard about it, and we could probably pencil in 1 or 2 of those players for one of those picks 6 through 8. The problem is, as a consensus, there's really only 2 quarterbacks they were talking about in the top 10 in Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And if you ask me, even that's a stretch. It's not like this is Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. It's not like this is Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin III, where it was like, all right, well, we have 2 guys at the top that we absolutely love, and they're going to go 1 and 2. It's basically like, yeah, these teams desperately need somebody to bet on, and in a draft class where it's going to take a little bit of a leap of faith for these quarterbacks, more so than we're used to, or maybe more so than teams or fan bases are comfortable doing. It's going to require that for even the very 2 top guys. So then once you get that, Garrett Nussmeier went back to school. Drew Aller went back to school. Jalen Milroe has really cooled off from a very hot start to the season, and he is extremely up and down. He is very, Anthony Richardson-like, where it's going to take a serious investment for him, and you're going to have to go through a lot of growing pains to get to a consistent level. And even Richardson here now, I'm not saying that we should give up on Richardson. That's not what I'm saying. But here we are. He's gone through some injuries. He's been in and out of the lineup. Like, even he is still developing. So you've just got to be okay with that. Now, the league drafted Anthony Richardson 6th overall. Do they think the same of Milroe? Or do they think that he is that same caliber of a quarterback? Because maybe if that's the case, then we can throw his name into the top 10. But I'm not convinced that that's the case at this point. It feels like the 2 names that we regularly hear are Ward and Sanders. And if those guys go 1-2 to the most desperate teams, well, then all of a sudden you think of Sam Darnold. But even if not Sam Darnold, like let's say the Vikings re-sign Sam Darnold, maybe the Vikings would be maybe they would move on from J.J. McCarthy. Maybe you could get a trade for J.J. McCarthy, who they drafted in the top 12 last year. Perhaps he becomes somebody who's on the market. Justin Fields is another player who could be out there, who would be a market quarterback for you to bring in and potentially give that starting job to. So there's a couple of different options here, but there's no doubt about it. The pro side of the acquisition of a quarterback, whether it's free agency or trade, typically costs a good amount of money, especially for a lot of those guys where, all right, you might not be trading a first-round pick for him. McCarthy, maybe you have to, but you might not be trading a first-round pick for him. But whatever you're going to trade for him to get him on your team, you're probably going to have to sign and do a pretty big deal soon after if they are as successful as you want them to be. Whereas a rookie quarterback, you have that cost-controlled contract for 4 to 5 years, 5 if you're picking them in the first round. So it is an interesting conversation because those 3 teams are probably going to be in the market, And I would say they would all lean towards taking a quarterback in the draft. But we don't really have that pool of players. We don't really live in that reality right now with those three teams.
Well, one of the things that's going to be so interesting is, I mean, Darnold's a huge player in all of this. And really, I'd say more than anything, the Vikings are. I think if the Vikings want Darnold back and are able to offer competitive, like make a competitive offer for him, that really changes the landscape, doesn't it? Because now the Vikings, one of those guys off the market, and you'd assume Russ is going back to the Steelers, so he's another one. So maybe Fields moves, but how many teams see Fields as a starter? I think he's one of the top 32, but I don't think he's good. And so how many teams are going to want to, it would be more of like
Fields?
A Gardner Minshew situation, right? Where like you sign the guy to be your starter, but he's not going to keep you from drafting somebody. Does that make sense?
You're saying Fields? You said that about Fields?
Fields, yeah,
yes,
correct.
Yes. I agree.
So it's just like an option.
You feel good about it, but yeah.
And so that would leave. I mean, where are the places Sam Darnold can go? This is something Ollie Connolly and I have talked about in our podcast. Like, where are the places Sam Darnold would actually go this offseason? Would you really want to go to the Raiders, who maybe a regime change again coming there? Like, that seems highly unlikely to me. Do you really want to go to the Jets? No, you've already been there. You know that's a train wreck. So that's off the table. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, there's two situations that need quarterbacks the most that are basically off the table for him. The Browns can't afford him, so that takes a third off the table. Do you want to go to the Titans? Do you want to go to the Giants? If Dable stays, could that be a fit for the Giants? Maybe, I think that's a possibility, but I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem that likely to me that there's a million landing spots. So I think the Vikings actually have a lot of leverage in this situation, even to bring him back and keep. And what the Vikings should do is try to bring him back and keep he and McCarthy, because McCarthy's value won't be higher now if they tried to move him. So I think you keep and develop McCarthy, and Darnold could easily hit a wall, and then you have a guy. Okay, yeah, we're paying Darnold more than we probably wish we had him, but we had to make the contract. He played well. We were maybe the 1 seed. We'll see what happens here, and we obviously had to pay the guy. Can't let him leave at that point. If he falls off again, and we have McCarthy, and if we have to pivot to plan B, great. We're paying plan A. That wasn't ideal, but like plan B hardly makes anything, and we're paying him on a rookie contract, and so you have options at least at that point. But I think that's easily the move for Minnesota, and I think in a normal year like last year that would have been hard to pull off. This year I think they actually have a lot more leverage because the other situations around the league are just, they're pretty bleak. And so maybe a team with a quarterback already in place gets involved that we don't anticipate now, but that won't be a players in the draft for a quarterback, but could be for Darnold. But he's a key figure in the entire top of the draft developing, because I don't see any other guy that would change that could be available this offseason that would change a team's opinion on whether they should take a quarterback in the top 10. Do you?
No, not that's going to be available. I mean,
because Cousins, even if Cousins got who would trade for Cousins?
No
one would see him as
Cousins isn't moving the needle.
The Falcons loved him, signed him to a huge deal, and they still took a quarterback in the top 10. That tells you everything you need to know about trusting his longevity. So I just don't see anybody, even if Rodgers goes to the Raiders or Giants. I know that's I'm just saying hypothetically, you wouldn't think they were less likely to take a quarterback at one of those spots, really. I don't think, because it's all about the future, and he's a stopgap option at this point at best, if he even gets interest from a team. So I don't know. It seems like a pretty bleak scenario for some of these teams that need quarterbacks this year. They might be right up here again next year, but I'm sure at some point we want to talk about Sanders and Ward's actual skill sets and kind of how they fit with these teams too.
Yeah, I do want to get to that in a second. I'm just sort of looking this up because now I'm just very curious. The off the wall ideas for quarterbacks, which I didn't mean for this totally to turn into a quarterback show, but this is kind of the way that I've set it up. The total off the walls is San Francisco. If they don't love Brock Purdy, they don't want to pay Brock Purdy, but Darnold was already in San Francisco, and they were obviously rolling with Purdy, so I don't really see that one happening. But Purdy becoming available somehow, again, I don't think that he's going to. Geno Smith with the Seattle Seahawks, he'll be 35. He'll be on the last year of his contract. Maybe I'm just not reading it correctly. I don't know how committed they are to him. He's going into the last year of his deal. Maybe this is the timeline and the plan all along, but I wonder if maybe Geno Smith becomes sneaky available. And then the Rams. The Rams are sort of the wild card one to me, because if Stafford retires, then all of a sudden, if I'm Darnold, it's Vikings and Rams without question my one and number 2 options. And then who knows after that? Like, it's a far gap between those two. So Matthew Stafford potentially retiring, if he retires this offseason, could make the Sam Darnold sweepstakes very interesting, because that gives a legitimate other suitor to where he would want to go.
Yeah. If that happens, I mean, Stafford, fresh off that Bills game, I'm not thinking about him retiring.
Dude, he's awesome. He's phenomenal. But what was it? What was it, like 2 years ago? He was sort of like entertaining the idea, where it was like, I don't know.
It's something you have to consider for sure. It's definitely something you have to consider every offseason.
I hope not, because he's awesome, because he's fantastic. Right. But let's get into some of these fits. Like, you want to talk about quarterbacks. If there's a specific fit that you like here at the very top of the draft when it comes to Sanders and Ward, and I'll throw those other teams in there as well. Like, if you would love to see Ward and Sanders style, or who they are as quarterbacks with the Titans, the Jets, the Browns. I know they're going to have some changes within their staffs and their philosophies for sure, but I would love to hear some ideal landing spots for those two dudes if you got them.
Oh man, this gets really hard, because the Raiders are, I'm assuming the Raiders are going to have a different coaching situation. So what does that look like? No idea from a fit perspective what that'll be. The Giants may also have a different coaching situation. We'll see what happens there. But, I don't necessarily see either of these guys as ideal Brian Daboll quarterbacks either.
I think Ward still is.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely could be, especially like getting to know the person's probably, it seems like a big deal to Daboll just for watching that offseason Giants show. Like, he loved Malik Neighbors' like competitive drive and tenacity as a player and brashness. And, we'll see how that plays out with these guys. Maybe there's somebody that ends up being a fit with them. But to me, when you look at Ward and Sanders, I think they both have flaws that could be fatal at that position, while also having like exciting, like out of structure ability that like makes you feel, I think, pretty good about their ceiling. And I know you and I've mentioned this before, but Sanders maybe doesn't have the physical tools of quarterbacks that like to play off script or hold the ball or things like that, which definitely show up at times on tape. He will skip throws when his feet aren't set that he should make, and I worry about that part of it. I do think he has great kind of feel and awareness as a quarterback, at least of what's happening down the field, not always what's happening in the pocket. He was under siege a lot, and so maybe the environment changes some of those things in the NFL. But yeah, when you take a ton of sacks in college football and you don't manage the pocket well, and really just in general, I would describe Sanders has and this could be a beneficial. I mean, Lamar had this to a degree and just was a way better athlete, obviously, and playmaker than even Sanders. Has way better tools, but they both kind of have this like laissez-faire way that they operate in the pocket, like just really kind of laid back, not going to get sped up by anything, which can be helpful at times, but also like can lead to a lot of sacks, a lot of misses, playing a little bit too lethargic, a little bit too slow paced, I think at times. I think that has its drawbacks too, and I wonder if Sanders is going to toe that line a little bit. And then with Ward, there's accuracy concerns. I mean, I'm not a huge mechanics all have to look the same for quarterbacks, but he misses throws, and that's a concern to me, I think, along with his wind-up delivery. Is that going to throw teams off a little bit? So it's going to be really, I think, with these teams and whether the interview process, I think it's going to be really telling, because both of these guys need development. And so what do teams believe about their ability to approach their work that way, to be professionals, to lead? You think about it, since we're mentioning Daboll at the top, you think about how Josh Allen was, right? It took 3 years, but they knew he was down for that. You know what I mean? Like, they knew he was built like that. So, can either of these teams comfortably say that about either of those top two consensus guys? I'm not sure at this point. I just don't know enough. And so that's good. That to me will determine like whether there is a lot of interest in this class at the top or whether there isn't. Because I could easily see this going the direction of the draft a couple years ago, with Pickett being the only one in the first round. If teams don't believe in the people, I think the talent, I think there's enough talent there with both these guys, but I think teams are going to have to believe in them as people and as leaders.
Yeah, if Daboll is still the head coach with the Giants, which I'm going to be honest with you, with every passing week, I think is less and less likely. given everything, we saw from like the Hard Knock stuff and, how tough this offseason was, and obviously like the Saquon stuff, and I'm sure that Mara didn't love that. And, the struggles just of this year, how Daniel Jones has just not been able to develop sort of how they handled the Daniel Jones situation. Now, I'm sure the owner was involved in that as well, so it's not like he's, pointing the finger at how they handled that. He was certainly very involved with the face of the franchise type of a quarterback and what was going on there, and, getting rid of him in the middle of the season, sort of allowing him to go sign elsewhere. But it's getting harder for me, even as somebody who likes Brian Daboll, and I'd like to see Brian Daboll still as the head coach for the New York Giants next year. It's getting hard for me to think that that's going to happen, because with every single week that goes by, the team is hardly playing to win football games. They're just kind of going out there and cashing paychecks. And when you lose that sort of motivation in the locker room, and when you lose that trust and that fire for playing for a head coach in an organization, it's tough to get that back. Even if you can explain all that, even if you can explain to yourself like, hey, it's just not our year. We're not very good this year, but hey, next year we'll be able to hit the ground running. Next year we'll have a new quarterback. We'll be good to go. Even with all of those things being true, sometimes when that apathy sets in, it's really tough to get away from unless you make a clean sweep. So I'm not convinced that Brian Daboll is going to be back. If he is, people talk about Daboll and what he's done with, running quarterbacks and mobile quarterbacks during his time when he was at Alabama, during his time when he was with the Buffalo Bills. Certainly Josh Allen is the prime example that everybody goes to. But even just beyond the mobility part of things, the dual threat things with Josh Allen, it was that crazy gunslinger mentality. I've got the arm to complete every single pass, but knowing that you don't have to attempt all of those throws. That is the mentality that I would love to see Daboll and Ward sort of pair together, because Ward has the ability to complete some special throws. You talked about, there's like these common play-by-play accuracy issues because of whether it's how his feet are set or not set, I should say. The arm angle that he throws it at, his timing, things like that. But there is just some beautiful big-time throws from this dude, especially this past year, but really throughout his college football career at Washington State or Incarnate Word as well. So getting a coach that has understood the Josh Allen assignment of it's going to take time. We don't want to coach that big play mentality out of you, but we want to make you a little bit more efficient. I'd love to see that pairing. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not so sure that we get it. I'll open it up to wherever you kind of want to go next with this order. If a certain team, is very intriguing for you, maybe some position groups that you kind of see coming up after quarterbacks, because we talked about, these are the two, maybe three, if you throw Milroe in there, again, depending on how teams view Milroe and what they believe with his work ethic and how much he's going to improve to get better. And I just want to make sure I say, it seems like Milroe's got great football character. Like, he seems like somebody who wants to push himself to be the best. We have seen that over the last couple of years when he's been at Alabama. So I think that stuff is going to check out, which means I do think that he has a chance to still be a first-round quarterback, even with that inconsistent tape, kind of just like Anthony Richardson was. But where else do you want to go here? We can talk about some teams maybe a little bit further down the order. How do you want to attack this? What do you want to talk about here with the rest of the order?
Well, it seems like defensive line's going to be featured in this draft.
Heavily. Yes.
Like, I don't know how much of this is, these guys are tier one type prospects at these positions, the Will Anderson type prospects, the Jalen Carter type prospects. But it seems like they're like Mason Graham seems like a consensus high pick. Abdul Carter is not fully developed still, but when you watch him move, it's hard not to see like this is a special type of athlete. Now that is a good building block. It doesn't necessarily take you all the way at that position, but there's a lot of ability for him, and I think that's exciting. And then you've got players who, continue to need more development. James Pierce, Michael Williams is in this conversation. Georgia, Jalen Walker is another one from Georgia. Shamar Stewart is in this conversation. So there's just a lot of edge guys. We could see, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a class with 6-7 edge guys, that are caliber first round, but we could see 6 or 7 go in the first round. Sort of like the draft a couple years ago where like, and maybe it plays out differently because the positions are scarce. The other positions are more scarce, but where we had like a run of edge guys at the end of the first round. You remember that where Odafe Owe and Peyton Turner and Shank all went. Like, it was kind of like boom, boom, boom. All these guys went off the board, and we ended up with a ton of edges in the first round, but we didn't necessarily have like a ton of like high caliber elite top 5 type talent at that position. And so that I think could be a way that the first round plays out, is having just all teams like, oh, this isn't a loaded class. Like in a lot of these positions, like there are a lot of questions on the O line. I mean, you've probably gone further there in evaluation than I have, but like, is there a true tackle that's like definitely is Calvin Banks like definitely a guy we're taking top 5 like in a vacuum? There's more questions there than there's been in the past. Let's just go all in on defensive line, and let's, at least if we're going to miss, let's miss going for a position of value that really matters and can move the needle for a franchise. So I wouldn't be surprised if the draft ends up moving that direction.
Yeah, ideally, you go quarterback at the very top. If we think maybe the top 2 quarterbacks are going with the Raiders and the Giants. New England would love to go offensive line. Yeah, I think that they would love to take whatever offensive lineman's there. If this is last year's draft and Joe Alt's in it, I think they're sprinting to the podium to take Joe Alt at number 3. This offensive tackle class is not quite of that caliber, but it's not to say that these guys can't be NFL players or good NFL players and good impact starters. The way that I've started to talk about this draft class as a whole is it just requires more of a leap of faith. It requires more due diligence into who these players are, how you believe they're going to improve, and more importantly, how they fit your system. There's not as many, yes, they are wildly talented and almost scheme-proof, team-proof types of players. That's not really how this class is. To me, it's a little bit more streamlined. It's a little bit more segmented, and it requires you to have the right coaching staff and the right plan for these players to get starters out of them. Because that's the thing. This draft class, like, it may not be last year's draft class in terms of like overall top tier talent, just top to bottom. There's going to be impact players and starters from this draft class. It's your job to find them, right? It's your job to put them in the right situations. And sort of that's how I would address this. So New England would love to get an offensive tackle. And I can sit here and tell you that, Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks Jr., the 2 top offensive tackles, in my opinion, are they what Joe Alt was last year? No, but I still think they could be in that conversation, that maybe they're not OT1 or OT2 last year, but OT3, OT4, OT5, something like that. I think that they could be within that conversation. So maybe you're taking one at 3 instead of, Talise Fuanga at 14 or wherever he went, or Amarius Mims at 18 or where those guys went. So what? You're maybe overdrafting him this year, but the class is the class. You've got to kind of get that out of your head. You got to see, well, we could have got one of these offensive tackles at 15 last year. It's not last year. You have to approach this draft class differently. You've got to be able to go get those starters where they currently are in the class. So I think for New England, offensive tackle is where I would go. Certainly you could entertain Travis Hunter as well whenever he's on the board. Basically every team in the NFL would love a player that talented. And to me, getting to pair him as a corner on one side with Christian Gonzalez on the other, that's pretty sick. And then obviously you get to play Travis Hunter at wide receiver as well. Jacksonville's kind of in a situation where I think that they would absolutely love Travis Hunter. I would think they would love to get him on the team. Carolina, you mentioned Mason Graham, you mentioned Abdul Carter. If they're sitting here at number 5 overall, I would bet a lot of money that Carolina is walking out of this draft with either Abdul Carter or Mason Graham, one of those 2 guys. Tennessee, I think you'd use a big-time wide receiver, maybe another offensive tackle. Maybe they take offensive tackle off the board. But that's sort of how I see those couple of teams playing out right there. And it's just a little different. You've just got to approach this class a little bit different is sort of what I'm saying here.
Yeah, was it the Panthers you said they're coming away with the defensive lineman?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I look at the Panthers and their front 7 is by far the biggest weakness on their team, and that's even with Derek Brown coming back and Jadeveon Clowney, who I think is certainly playing fine as a free agent for them this year, playing for the first year.
If they don't take the best defensive lineman, they're crazy, because they did a good job this past offseason. It's kind of been a slept-on storyline, but they did a good job. They rebuilt their offensive line
100%.
They spent some money to do it, but they did a good job. They were able to adequately protect their quarterback. Now that's a pretty important bar to clear, and I think that's why they've been a little more competitive this season. So that they need to do the same thing on the defensive line. They're one of the worst pass rushing teams of all time statistically, I believe, and so. That is easily the area they need to improve on. The Patriots are kind of open book, right? Like they need absolutely everything. They seem like a pretty ideal landing spot for Hunter. Let's see, how the draft even how the final order even develops and whether the regime changes with New England. It seems like they just have drama every single day, which is just so funny compared to where they've been as a franchise. But they're like the drama team right now in the media. And I think, like I said, Cleveland, I think, is a prime candidate to move up this order. I don't know whether that means they're going quarterback, but they're kind of interesting because quarterback is really what's doomed them, and then their offensive line falling off as well. Could they be a team that, let's say, Will Campbell's seen as a guard and the Patriots rather go tackle, and the Jaguars and have already made commitments at the tackle position, the Panthers have as well, and so maybe they're a team that's a prime landing spot for a Calvin Banks with Jedrick Wills, not turning out that well, and DeJuan Jones getting hurt, and Jack Conklin's getting older, and I don't know where the contract situations or how likely it is to have all those guys. So maybe they try to go with one of the top offensive tackles in the draft. Seems like a fit that makes sense to me. And the Jets are really interesting because they have invested in a lot of the positions you want to be investing in as a rebuilding team. And I don't even know if they've missed on those. They just have had a lot of players get hurt. Elijah Vera Tucker has looked good when he's healthy. He's out there. Joe Tippmann, it's been mixed reviews at this point. His offensive line, you usually say, okay, if quarterback, offensive line, defensive line, those are the places we want to rebuild. Well, we have Quentin Williams. Will McDonald's done some good things. We had Jermaine Johnson. He got hurt. They definitely could use pass rush help. Don't get me wrong. And they may take another one of these guys. But they've also spent a lot at this position. And they obviously added Reddick, and that didn't work out, so they had to move him. And so they could be another prime candidate for a defensive line spot. But they actually have some talent. I mean, wide receiver is the one that to me that looks that kind of is like, okay, if you can find a long-term running mate with Garrett Wilson, because I don't know what's going to happen with Devontae this offseason, and it probably doesn't even matter because the team's focused on the future more than likely. So if you could find somebody who you believe is, whether it's McMillan or somebody else that you believe could be the guy next to Garrett Wilson, that could be interesting. So those are just some of the thoughts of the top 8 that I have just kind of moving around those teams where I think they could be focused in pretty different directions right now.
And sitting there at number 9, honestly, the Bears are interesting as well, right? A team that definitely wants to make a splash, get back in the win on the other side of the win column because their division is running away without them, and you know that they want to close that gap and be a lot better next season. They've got an extra second-round pick. It's the final pick that they traded for the Bryce Young deal, and so maybe they've got a little bit of ammunition to move up. We would love to hear from you guys as well. Let us know your thoughts on wherever your team is picking currently in the draft order, who you would like for them to target, what positions, just an ideal draft scenario. We would love to hear from you guys in that regard. We will be back with you in a couple of weeks, taking a little bit of a break off with the holidays, but we'll be sure to be back with you when we get close to the end of the regular season and revisit this, maybe even give you guys a mock draft episode. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That's Jon Ledyard saying thank you guys so much for watching and listening to the PFF NFL show. We'll see you guys next time.